Hi, welcome to another lesson. Good to have your company again. I trust you're going well. Today we're going to be looking at the 5-minute message, the short speech. 5-minute message. One of my favourite speakers, one of my favourite orators was, or is still, Winston Churchill. A very inspiring speaker. And one of his more well-known speeches took place on October the 29th in 1941 at his primary school, Harrow School in England. There's some conjecture as to the length of his speech, whether it was 3 words or 28 words. That's right, you heard me. 3 words or 28 words. The 3-word version is easy to remember. He simply said, "Never give up." He stood up after he'd been introduced, said those 3 words, and then sat down. Some say people were quite disappointed. Here's the Prime Minister of England coming to our school to deliver a speech, and he just stood up and gave 3 words. There's some conjecture as to whether it was 3 words or 28 words. The 28-word version went something like this: never give in, never give in, never give in. In nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in, except to convictions of honour and of good sense. Whether it was 3 words, never give up, or whether it was the 28-word version, I'm sure you'll agree with me that you don't need many words to say something inspiring, something impacting, to be able to motivate and inspire people. You don't actually need many words. So I want to look at the 5-minute message and how you can. I want to show you how you can say something inspiring and informative in 5 minutes. They say on average people speak or use 4 words per second. If you're a little slower, it might be 3, a little quicker, maybe 5 or 6, but on average 4 words per second. That's 240 words per minute. So a 5-minute speech would therefore require 1,200 words. You say, wow, 1,200 words, what does that look like? Well, if you were to type out double space with a margin, that's 4 to 5 pages of notes. Think about it that way. 5 minutes? Doesn't sound much, does it? 5 minutes? 4 to 5 pages of notes? Oh, okay. You can start to see how possible it is to say something impacting and influential in 5 minutes. Of course, the challenge is crafting and creating and building those 1,200 words, those 5 minutes worth of words. But it can be done. It can be done. And I want to show you that in this particular lesson. We're going to look at 5 general principles. 5 general principles of the 5-minute message, and then we're going to look at the communion message and the testimony to help us out there. So let's get into it, shall we? You ready to go? Principle number 1, you start with what you know. Start with what you know. Ask yourself this question: what subjects do I know? It's a 5-minute message. What subjects can I speak on that I have some understanding about, some knowledge, some experience of? Let's start with, and particularly for those of you who have never spoken before, think about what you know. No matter how old you are, 14, 10, 50, doesn't matter, start with what you know. You could ask yourself questions like, what truths am I living out every day? What Bible verses have I got some revelation on? What lessons have I learned, either recently or in times gone by, that I could speak on? Here's what I've discovered. Some people like to say something. Some people have something to say. You'll find it much easier to say something and have something to say if you speak on what you know. You see, the key when you speak is to speak with authority and speak with integrity. And you can do that when you speak not just out of theory. I mean, if you're just going to speak out of theory, just give people the book and let them read it. Just give people, the notes and let them read. But people don't want to just read. They want to come and be inspired. They want to hear, what do you know? What can you teach us? What can you show us? Inspire me with what you know. So we start with what we know. Think of the subjects. List them down. What subjects could I speak on? The second principle is we have to know the audience. How to speak for 5 minutes. Pick some subjects, then identify the audience. Who is going to be there? Who am I going to be speaking to? And ask yourself the question, I wonder what kind of challenges this audience is going through on the whole. What kind of challenges are people wrestling with? Spiritually, emotionally, physically, socially? What kind of challenges would they be facing that I could speak out of what I know into their challenges? The third principle is, then we need to choose a subject that fits both 1 and 2. You've got a list of subjects you could speak from. You know the audience, then we marry it up. Principle number 3, we simply marry that up. We simply look, okay, here's the audience, here's what I know, what is going to be the best subject now for me to speak on. Here's a thought. Once you've decided on your subject, you're halfway there. Even for me, and I've been speaking now for 30 years, the biggest challenge is working out what to say. What should I speak on? So once you've got that, congratulations, you're halfway there. Principle number 4. Now we begin to look at that subject and identify a theme. Identify a theme. What am I going to say about this subject? For example, if the subject you've chosen, just for illustration purposes, let's say the subject is forgiveness. I'm going to speak on forgiveness. Well, the reality is, I could preach on forgiveness for the rest of the year. In fact, I could probably preach on forgiveness for the next 2 years. The subject of forgiveness in the Bible is so rich and so deep, and there's so much depth to that subject. You could speak forever on the subject of forgiveness. So we need to narrow that subject down to a theme. So for illustrative purposes, let's say the subject is forgiveness. That's what's on your heart. You've identified the audience. I'm going to speak on forgiveness. We could narrow that down and we could say, okay, why don't we speak on God is a forgiving God? Subject, forgiveness. Theme, God is a forgiving God. We could pick a text like 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. You see, what you've got to work out is, what do you want to say about what you want to say? I'm going to talk on forgiveness. I'm going to narrow it down to that theme of God is a forgiving God. So we've got our subject, we know the audience, we've narrowed it down to a theme. Now principle number 5, now we begin to craft and build and construct this message using the theme. Not the subject, but using the theme. Now every message should have 3 key components. Even the 5-minute, whether it's 5 or 40, 3 key components. Very simple. You have an introduction, you have a body, and you have a conclusion. They're the 3 components. Let's have a look at them very quickly. The introduction. In the introduction, you introduce your subject and you introduce your theme. And I suggest you take 1 minute to do that. Let me show you how that can be done in 1 minute. You can time me if you like. Putting myself a bit nervous now. 1 minute. Here we go. Good morning, church. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I want to speak on forgiveness, and in particular, God is a forgiving God. The text that I'd like to read to you is from 1 John 1, verse 9. If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I was born in 1965 in Scunthorpe, England. I was adopted out after 10 days. My mother gave me over while she was still in hospital. 33 years later, I was reunited with my birth mother. It was an amazing experience there in England. just outside of Sheffield. At 2 in the morning, I can still picture it, winter's morning, 2 in the morning, I'm standing with her and she says to me, Jeremy, could you do one thing for me? I said, sure, Anne, what would you like? She said, would you forgive me? She said, for letting you go, for not wanting you. I said, Anne, I can easily do that. If that's what you're after, you're forgiven. She said, just like that? I said, just like that? She said, how can you do that? I said, I'm doing for you what God did for me. He forgave me of all my sin and all the things I've done wrong, and I can do that for you, and you're forgiven. Now, what I've just tried to demonstrate, I don't know if that was a minute, I'm hoping it was under a minute, but thereabouts anyway. What I've done is I've introduced my subject, my theme, my text, and I've also added a short story. Now, I hope that story, and I'm pretty sure that story may have grabbed your attention, may have drawn you in. And that's what an introduction needs to do. You're setting yourself up. Read a scripture, tell a story. You've got 1 minute. The next 3 minutes are now going to be dedicated to the body, the main part of the message. I want you to remember these 2 key words when we talk about the body of your message. We simply describe and provide. Describe and provide. We describe a problem and we provide a solution. We describe a problem and we provide a solution. And we do that by using scriptures. You can use other text, illustrations, and applications. So, for example, in that text, 1 John 1 and verse 9, we describe the problem. The problem is we're sinners. We're confessing sin because we have sin. We're sinners. The solution is confession. So you describe and provide, and then you add illustrations to that, and you give them an application as well. Then we have the conclusion. So we've got an introduction, we've got the main body, and we've got the conclusion. The conclusion is where we just wrap it up. We recap and we give people an action step. So an action step on this particular message, this 5-minute message, could be, would you like to confess your sin and receive God's forgiveness? He's a forgiving God. He can be your personal forgiving God. And you could lead people in a prayer or whatever you want to do. But we preach for that action point. So you see, it can be done. You can say something meaningful, inspirational, motivational. You can feed people in 5 minutes. It's just a matter of crafting that, being conscious of the time, picking a subject and a theme that you can speak about with some authority and some amount of confidence. Yeah? So that's the 5-minute message. We've got a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to make a few comments about the communion message or your testimony. Have you ever had the opportunity to share around communion? What a wonderful privilege that is. You know, what a wonderful discipline of the Christian faith, where we share in the death and the burial and the resurrection of our Saviour, our lover, our friend. And then the testimony message. Think about it again with that structure that I just gave you. But I just want to make a couple of comments. Firstly, about the communion message. You can again, let me reiterate, 5 minutes is plenty of time to say something meaningful and to give people something to think about and moves over around that time of communion. 5 minutes is plenty. You don't need 20 minutes. You can say something in 5 minutes. But just one thought about the communion message. Whatever you're going to say, whatever thoughts, whatever revelations you have, whatever text you want to use, I think every communion message has to have this one thought communicated. It can be one point of 3 or whatever it might be. But I think every communion message needs the key message of communion, and that is, do you know what it is? You're probably looking at it on the screen maybe. It's that little word, remember. Remember. When we meet together and we share communion together, we must remember. I think it's imperative that if you have that opportunity to lead around that communion time, draw people's attention to Luke 22:19. As often as you do this, you remember me. You can speak about the blood, you can speak about forgiveness, you can speak about the cross, about sacrifice, love, but at some point we're calling people to remembrance. I was at a church, preaching at a church on the weekend, Father's Day, and they had a time of communion. And I was quite interested because I just finished preparing these lectures, and this particular one, and I was keen to see if the gentleman that was leading us around communion would mention this, remember me. And he only had 5 minutes as well, and he did. Just there, he sort of, toward the end, and he said, he just encouraged the church, church, we're here to remember what Jesus did for us, And afterwards, I spoke to him, I said, what do you think is the most important message? And he actually didn't really know. He said, there's so much. And I said, I think it's that we've got to call people to remembrance. And he said, I did that. And he was so chuffed with himself. So I'm just encouraging you. To me, the main objective of communion is that we're remembering what Jesus did for us, and what a beautiful thing it was that he did for us. A couple of minutes left. I just wanted to make a remark, a comment on our testimony. You've been given 5 minutes to share testimony. It's at the youth group or the men's breakfast or, Sunday night church, whatever it might be, and you've got 5 minutes. And the pastor has asked you, or your leader's asked you, share your testimony. Let me give you a couple of thoughts. Firstly, everyone has a testimony. Every one of you now that's listening and watching this, let me tell you, you have a testimony. You have one. Don't worry about comparing yourself to others and other testimonies. You have a testimony. You say, what is a testimony? I look at it this way. Look at the first 4 letters of the word testimony. Test. To me, a testimony is a test that we have encountered and passed. You pass the test. When you pass the test, you've got a testimony. And in the testimony, we're simply testifying to the test that you passed. We're testifying to the struggle. We're testifying to the challenge that we took up. Whether it was self-inflicted or whether it was imposed on us, all of us go through times of testing that if we go through it, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we walk through it, we come out the other side, and we come out the other side with a testimony, and that's what we share. We share the challenge, we share the struggle. If you haven't come out yet, then you haven't got a testimony. Wait till you come out the other side. Wait till you come out and then share and inspire people with your testimony. I believe the best testimonies are personal testimonies. And you've got one. You're probably working on one right now. You're probably aware of it, maybe you're not. You might be in a barren place. You might be in the valley of indecision. Whatever it is, keep pressing through. His rod and his staff will comfort you and take you through and give you a testimony to be able to share. The Bible says in Revelation 12:11, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Just a couple of thoughts about the testimony and that communion message focused around the 5-minute message. You can do it. 5-minute message. All the best next time you speak. See you next time.